Hello, Hotep, and welcome. I'm Mark Morgan, companion of Set and Knight of Shambhala, and this is the Egyptian Magic Podcast. And for today's show, and probably a couple of others after it, because it's a big subject, which was tackled once or twice before, but basically it revolves around the issue of the Decans. And I'm recording and repeating a lecture that I just did at Glastonbury Occult Conference, where they have now a memorial lecture for Jake Stratton-Kent, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago now, and was sufficiently influential and respected in the occult world for people to think it would be a good idea to have a kind of special lecture for him. And I think I'm the second person to have done this. I think Dave Rankin did the first one, and there may have been one before, I'm not sure really. Anyway, so it seemed a good opportunity then to get up to date, or to go back into Jake's work and to look at certain themes there, and came up with a theme that was of interest to both of us really, which would be the Decans, or Decans if you like, or Decans I would say, and the question of their relationship to the demons. So there you go, demons and Decans for Jake Stratton-Kent, or as I called it, Jake Stratton-Kent's demonic calendar, meaning, well, of course, I put together the term demonic calendar, I think. But of course, I then discovered that he probably would have his own version of a demonic calendar, so it seemed appropriate to use that as a title. Okay, so a little quote from his masterpiece, which is highly recommended if you can get hold of it, called Geosophia, which is a 2-volume extensive work, one of the early ones, produced by Scarlet Imprint. And here he says that astrology is of critical importance in the development of Western magic. It is also the basis of much of the symbolism of the grimoires. So there you go. JSK, so I call her now, Jake, drew our attention to the fact that the system of what he called planetary hours was, in his experience, essential to the practice of goetic magic, or goetic magic, which is a kind of very popular form of magic. So the 24-hour clock, on which the system of planetary hours are 24 planetary hours, or two sets of 12 planetary hours, really repeating, was, as he knew, and he says in the Geosophia, an Egyptian innovation, something they invented, and we're going to go into in quite a lot of detail now and over the coming lectures. To understand the full implications, one would do well, in my opinion, to know something about the Egyptian magic of the sky, and especially their use of a thing known as the star clock, which is what is going to feature a lot, and we're going to illustrate it in the coming lectures. But first I'll say a few words about JSK and the particular book as well, Geosophia. As I'm talking in honor of JSK, Jake Stratton-Kent, I should say I knew him from way back, when he was one of the first speakers at the Thelemic Symposium, which I helped found in the 1980s, and which met for almost a decade or more in Oxford, often in Oxford Town Hall and various other venues, and has recently been revived as well. And hopefully there'll be other symposia in Oxford, which I hope, anybody listening to this, you might enjoy, to come along and meet the people in the flesh. You can't beat meeting the people in the flesh, You make some of the best friendships in terms of magic or anything else when you go to these events. Anyway, that's a good plug for any sort of event, really, but especially our event in Oxford. For this kind of thing, I assumed that what one did is took a theme from one of his books, one that interested me as a speaker, and extend with it, run with it, if you like, and see where it takes us. It was a great opportunity to show lots of really cool pictures from my favorite and hopefully your favorite magical culture, which I will add to the backdrop to this lecture in the editing stage, as they're rather good. The magical culture obviously comes, that we're focusing on, is mainly from the time of the pharaohs, the great kings of and queens of ancient Egypt, the sort of high point of the culture in some ways, although even that idea of cultures having a high point is contested. You know, sometimes in the area people say it's not in its peak moment, is also could be more interesting than it was in the pharaonic times. Anyway, it's different, but certainly mostly we're going to focus on the high culture of Egypt, the things of the pyramids and the famous tombs and all the rest. And I'm going to talk about, as I say, star maps, which are these amazing diagrams and books that are often painted onto the walls of tombs and buildings connected with the practice of magic. And their presence as images is very, very important to the actual methods one uses to practice this kind of stuff. Now, as I say, I'm going to talk about this in connection with Jake's idea of goetic magic. Now, mention Goetia, of course, and most people instinctively, if they know anything about the subject, will think of the well-known grimoire of magic popularized by Aleister Crowley, the Lesser Key of Solomon, which, as I say, if this is new to you, I still think it's quite a good introduction. It gives you a good feel for what the subject matter, and it's illustrated, and it's quite sort of exciting in lots of ways as a book. But Jake's Goetia, it would be far more extensive than you would find in this published book. Several editions are available in fairly cheap versions, or economical versions won't break the bank or anything. Often the best books of magic, unless they're academic books, are fairly well priced these days. You know, you get some quite amazing gems. Strangely, I was reading Jake's book that I mentioned, the Geosophia, which is we're going to come back to again and again. He tends to exclude Crowley's Goetia from the actual canon. He viewed it as a kind of later derivative text rather than the kind of real Goetia stuff, which I'll talk about in a minute. I wouldn't necessarily agree with him. It's it's another one of these things that is contested or debated. It seems quite clear that the Goetia has these roots in late Egyptian or Greco-Egyptian magic, things like the Testament of Solomon seems to have a number of parallels with it. So even though you can't completely put a date on it, maybe it seems to come from that sort of milieu. I also found it a bit of a shame to exclude it from the topic because of it's one of the things I liked about the book, right, and always related to. Apart from the fact it's probably the only book that only Goetic texts I'm that familiar with, is that it has this suggested, my edition anyway, it has this suggested correspondence between 72 demons. So the Goetia is a kind of manual or a compendium of 72 different demons that do different things, and the methods and the sigils that you might use to evoke them, to bring them out and to use them in magic. And the fact that there were 72, I thought, well, that might well be a relationship with the Decans. The Decans, first thing to remember before I kind of explain this concept, there are kind of 36 of them. In fact, there's 36 particular constellations in the sky in a sequence that rise and fall in a certain way and therefore mark time. And the way the Egyptians spread out their time, if you like, whereas we have a 7-day week, they actually had a 10-day week. Hence the term Decan comes from their term, the idea that they had a 10-day week. And for each week in the Egyptian system, a particular constellation would kind of rule, if you like, or would rise on the first day of the week, and would, dominate that week in terms of what was seen in the sky. And this changed over the course of a year, and this gives rise to this kind of calendar, if you like, certainly a ritual calendar. And I would argue, as I'm going to do, that it's a kind of demonic calendar as well, which fits us with the Goetia, which is definitely goetic, definitely demonic. All the pictures of, kind of have a look for yourself. Maybe I'll show a couple of those on the backdrop, just to give you an idea. So the idea in appendix to one of the editions of the Goetia, it has this system of 2 sequences of decans. So 2 times 36, making the 72. One for the day, it says, and one for the night. Whether that system completely holds up is another matter, because obviously the decans can only really be observed in the night because they're a constellation thing. They have another method of measuring time, which was very, very important in Egyptian magical religion, in the day, using things like water clocks or shadow clocks. It'll be a more common feature. Often the two things come together. But whatever, there's certainly more than one sequence of decans known from antiquity, several different sequences. So it could fit with that idea, I think. Anyway, Jake rather informs us that this interpretation of the Goetic demons actually comes from Dr. Rudd's book, which is published as The Goetia of Dr. Rugg. Sorry, I'll get it right in a minute. The Goetia of Dr. Rudd, which of course is from these amazing series of books by Stephen Skinner and David Rankin. And apparently it's in there, and I've got a copy just there, and it is there, I think. And it has no basis, he says, other than that. Which is, say, it probably has a point about that, or certainly in terms of its emergence into our magical discourse. Then there's still a lot going for Rudd's viewpoint, I would say, and it may well be based on an older occult tradition that's not so well known now. So you can't just discount it on that basis. I think it might well be important, as a lot of texts of that period are, for recording older texts. So by Goetia, Jake meant, in essence, a more earthy religion of the ancient Greeks. In his book Geosophia, he painstakingly reconstructs an underworld through which the Greek magicians journeyed. They took the night journey. He constructed this. Jake did, reconstructed it rather. He came up with a rather brilliant idea, I have to admit, that you take the famous story of Jason and the Argonauts, and he viewed that as a kind of, not as a kind of historical journey, although it could have been that as well, but more as a kind of psychological journey, or as a night journey, as a magical journey that was used by people who practiced the goetia. So he viewed it then as the Greek equivalent of a cycle who is more well known to us and more famous in the mostly secret books of the underworld books of pharaonic Egypt. And of course, an example on the backdrop of myself, I use all the time behind me of one of that's the actual Book of Earth. I'm not thinking of, I'm not sure if we could count the Book of the Dead, although it's probably the thing that people first arrive at when they're trying to think of these magical books and everything, but it is quite a difficult book to make sense of in some ways, the Book of the Dead, or the Book of Coming Forth by Day. There's this other series of books, notably books like the Amduat, which means what is in the underworld, the Book of Gates. These are kind of the Book of the Earth, which I've already mentioned, the Book of Nuit. They're painted on the walls of tombs, and that kind of gives the impression they're not known from any other manuscript, unlike the Book of the Dead, which exists in loads and loads of different versions of the manuscript. These books are only known from being transcribed from the walls of tombs. And that implies that they were very, very secret books, or they were reserved for particular situations, perhaps for certain classes of people, or perhaps for certain, as I say, special events, one way or another. There is actually a very nice edition of the Amduat that my company Mandrake produces, which kind of is very, very complete, and it's got a good way of getting into this kind of mindset as well. The relationship, not just, there's a kind of very special relationship between these books and the, I call them the psychonaut. Maybe I should call him the Argonaut. From now on, but however, the person going through this journey was usually an initiate in the mysteries. Anyway, going back to Jake's idea of the voyage of the Argo, or the Jason and the Argonauts, which is a good excuse to go and look at the famous film, the kind of, I don't know, it's not Hammer House, is it? Whatever, it's kind of got this Harry Hammerhausen or whatever it is animations in it, which are rather wonderful. Maybe I don't know how it stands up nowadays, but it's certainly, if you like Greek mythology and a bit of an adventure, it's quite an amazing show. That's based on this a real text from antiquity of the voyage of the Argo. And again, with CC Argo, you get synchronicities. When you think of Argo, for some strange reason, things that I've read when I was first getting into magic, one of the classics would be a book by an alchemist called Fulcanelli, translated into English as The Mystery of Cathedrals, meaning the Gothic cathedrals, like the one at Glastonbury, of course, which is pretty ruinous. You can't really make much of that. But there are some very fine samples across Europe, and there are one or two surviving examples of Gothic cathedrals survive in Britain as well, although often a lot of the decoration, because of our religious history, has been removed. So the mystery has kind of been removed. I was reminded after I've kind of done this that one of the mysteries of cathedrals that Fulcanelli talks about, which might seem slightly unlikely, but it's sort of, if you kind of think that one of the oldest surviving hieroglyphs from pharaonic times is the symbol of the ankh. You know, I'll put it on the screen. You probably know it already. This hieroglyph was just carries on, really. I don't mean it. All sorts of Christian books and all sorts of mystery books and magical books that carried on using this very, very important symbol. And Fulcanelli had this theory that a cathedral, when you look at it, is a kind of Calvary cross shape with a kind of rose window at one end. And if you combine the rose window with a cross shape, essentially you have the ankh. So the entire ground plan of a cathedral, according to Fulcanelli, is a kind of form of the Egyptian ankh. It's a kind of memory of it. It's paying some sort of homage to the symbol of the ankh, and the ankh meaning life. So the whole idea of the cathedral. So there's a lot more in the book that probably make another subject, but certainly there's a lot of magic and mystery encoded, especially in the European Gothic cathedrals, the old ones, before, you know, all these mysteries got forgotten and papered over. He even speculates that the word Gothic in French, gothique, is actually a play on the word, here's a coincidence, Argonaut. It's gothique, Argonaut. That's the idea. Or also something to do with the Argo. Now, Argo again has these sort of double meanings of, which we'll go into the kind of official meanings soon, but Argo also means as kind of a language, a slang language, or maybe you'd say a secret language, a twilight language, we'd call that in the magical tradition. A twilight language taken from the tantric idea of a secret way of using a secret subtext to language, one way or another. Okay, Argonaut also, as we say, means the voyage of the Argo. Argo, the name of the ship that Jason and his Argonauts sailed on their journey across the sea. It's the name of a ship, the Argo. Now, coincidentally, although it probably isn't a coincidence, in Greek astronomy there is a constellation with the same name. And the historian Plutarch, you can find out if you haven't read Plutarch's Isis and Osiris, is a classic work, probably the most read work on ancient Egypt ever, says that this same constellation was known to the Egyptians of earlier times and before the Greeks. The ship or boat is, of course, a very suggestive Egyptian image, occurring over and over again within Egyptian magic and Egyptian religion. It is on that boat that you, the person being transformed or either after death or in life, makes one's journey, one's underworld journey on this boat. Famously, we're shown it usually with the god Ra, who travels on these boats through the sky. He has two such boats, one for the day and one for the night. There's the two sequences again. And yeah, the image now on the screen is of the famous boat of Ra, from the tomb of, I think, Ramesses the Ninth. I'm not completely sure without looking it up, but because there's several versions of this in various states. Again, think of this as an illustrated book. There's a whole book that's connected with this, painted on the walls, that tells you everything you need to know as you go through this journey, and lots of secrets. So that's the Boat of Ra. You won't necessarily find that particular boat within Jake's underworld journey. His particular Argo takes him on a different route into the Marmara, which was the inland sea that separated Anatolia and the unfamiliar land, where Jason and his crew sail in search of the Golden Fleece. And the Golden Fleece is like another version of the Golden Dawn in a way. It's this kind of thing that one quests for, the quest for this ultimate mystery of life and of knowledge and all the rest, the Golden Fleece. And if you work out all the geography of that, which Jake does in some detail and gives you a great deal of interesting background, this is Thrace, where Jason and his Argonauts take this journey into what was then an unknown land to ancient Colchis. So if you're wondering where Jake Stratton-Kent is residing these days, I'd hazard a guess that he's somewhere in that particular underworld, which he wrote as the destination of all magicians after death. That's the way he saw it. You'll also find him in the pages of his books, especially the symbolic universe he constructed or revealed in what is probably, I would say, his most thorough work on all of this, the Geosophia, a monumental piece in 2 volumes, which is available, I think. The meaning of the book would be wisdom of the earth. But I also think maybe there's a nod to the idea of the Goetia, which figures in it quite a lot, is the heart of the matter, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and end of the magical endeavor. So in his book, there's a long passage in which he transcribes the ritual for the invocation of one's holy guardian angel. Again, another one of these important tasks that, depending on what particular style of magic you're interested in, that is set for you. Some particular traditions, especially the Thelemic one, this is called ritual. It's like the underworld journey in a way. It appears that Holy Guardian Angel, this kind of ultimate embodiment of the Golden Fleece, if you like, and of knowledge, appears at the end of a parade of lesser beings. So it doesn't just appear, all these lesser beings, such as the 72 in the published Goetia, they come first, probably you'd say in order of rank, beginning with the demons and progressing through their ranks until the highest come. There are also some explanations of why that might be so, given that they maybe they move as the Holy Guardian Angel approaches, all the higher things approach the lesser things that are trying to get out of the way. It's a familiar enough idea in one way or another, but it lends itself to the idea that there's a sequence to the demons, which are kind of pointing out, like the Decans themselves have a sort of a sequence. It's a series of 36 stars, or collections of stars in the sky originally, but they rise and fall over the course of a year. So they lend themselves to an idea of a sequence. There'll be a particular time of year when particular Goetic demons or whatever you imply in this might be more prevalent. And it's also said, I've read elsewhere, that one's holy guardian angel, if this is an important image to you, is closer to you, to each individual, on their birthday. So knowing the sequence, if you like, will give you some idea of which of these entities might actually be. It gives you a clue to who your guardian spirit might be, and there are ways of calculating that. For each person, as you probably know, I sometimes assist in that, and I've got my own book, which is probably still quite a complicated thing, and people need a little bit of guidance sometimes to work out how they fit into the sequence. So the sequence moves in space and time. It's a calendar as well. The old sense of a calendar, the literal meaning was to call out. To call out when one saw the first very appearance of the new moon. There was a calling out, perhaps of a special prayer, hence the name calendar. JSK says that grimoire magic takes place as soon as possible after the new moon. And one could assume that would mean as soon as you know it is the new moon, and it's convenient, or on the first crescent. It's a popular thing because that's so obvious in the sky. It also requires, this sort of work, an awareness of what he called the planetary days and hours. And the navigator or Argonaut needs to know how to calculate these. Mostly would be the first hour of each day. Right? It's going to be the most important. Let's say, remind you again the image of the star boat. I've been talking for a little while now, and probably I found when I was doing the lectures it's probably quite complicated, and I went a bit too fast. So I'll talk a little bit more about Jake's approach to this, and then come back to it and really start again, but take it from the Egyptian point of view. But I first wanted to mention that in Egypt, the star that I mentioned, known as the ship or Argo, is a very, very important star in the sequence. Obviously, it's such a long time ago, and with so many different systems of astronomy in use, it hasn't been always that easy to work out what the stars that are referred to in these star maps, which I'm going to show some examples of, how they correspond with actual stars in the sky, because the names have changed. And also, we draw a constellation, we call it, put it this way, the star that they call Argo, the ship, we might call it Libra nowadays. And Libra, if you look at it, you could think of it as like a little scales and everything like that. But if you compare it, it does actually look like a little boat as well. You could think about the shape of the boat and the mast in the center, and maybe some figures and a little shrine there. So the shape that has been given to the constellations, whether it's kind of little animals in the case of the zodiac, or as I say, if you look at across cultures, people have always drawn little figures to connect the stars to help them remember them, or they've seen these kind of creatures in the sky. Obviously, people see different creatures. It's a kind of exercise in virtual reality, really. And no surprise then, the Egyptians joined the dots in a different way, and some of their constellations are very, very large, and some of them we can sort of recognize, and others are kind of a little bit uncertain what they are. it's important because if we were trying to reconstruct the Egyptian version of the Decans, which I have done now, then if you knew which one was at the beginning and which one was about halfway along, then you can certainly work out where the line is, the band, if you like, falls across in the sky. And as it happens, well, we know with the first, with some certainty, which the first star is, and because it's so well known, it virtually hasn't changed, and that's the star Sothis, or the dog star. This is usually the first one in the sequence. There is another one that, in another family of Decans in Egypt, that begins the sequence, and the switch between the two might have is significant. And this is Kenamet. Anyway, those two, which also has an incredibly interesting history, which we are going to talk about. Either way, so we know that which is where the start of the decanal belt was in the sky, and we know that the constellation Argo, or the ship for the Egyptians, occurs about halfway. So we can find the decanal belt, in other words, and this one has a great name. With lots of different association. It's known as the master or heart of the ship, Heri Ib Wire. And it's identified, as I say, as being one of the brightest stars in the constellation of Libra now. It was very special to the Egyptians, as I say, being one of the decanal stars, and it was used to measure the hours during the passing of the night, when dark things happened, if you like, to people, when they were reconstituted, if they were dead and resurrected. So it brings us back then to the fact that space and time were two aspects that particularly interested Jake Stratton-Kent, and I share quite a lot of that interest, as you can probably tell. He was also very unusual in magicians of the time when I first met him, that he was actually interested in astrology, or what we might more accurately call religious astronomy. I think this was kind of a feature of the magic of the time in the 80s or whatever, that people were reacting against the kind of what they perceived as a new age thing, and they kind of thought they were in danger of throwing out a lot of very interesting material and techniques, as they were rejecting the kind of new age thing and trying to get back to the magic. Well, Jake was very unusual in that, as I say, unlike most magicians who might say it was a bit boring. He was actually really, really good at it and really into it. We're all supposed to know the basics. If you've ever looked at the curriculum of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, there are all these various lessons, that you have to kind of things you have to memorize and you're supposed to know. And one of these is actually just the signs of the zodiac. You're supposed to know the signs of the zodiac in order and what their little glyph or sigil might be. That's enough for most people. Some people would find that pretty easy, but that would be a basic skill for a magician, because so many of the texts are they don't write out in full the name of a planet or whatever. They put the symbol in. As I say, in the Goetia, a dawn operation is apparently recommended, or the hour before the dawn. And this moment in time has always been important for the magician. Certainly was in antiquity and for the Egyptians, where it corresponded to what they called the duat or gate, a gateway between our world and the other world. It's a kind of twilight zone, a liminal zone or twilight zone. It's an entrance into the underworld. The Egyptians, in a way, a lot of these calculations and tables and decanal things are their attempt to kind of automate it in a way, so that although it's quite likely that people did get up before dawn and do the rituals, in a sense they could sort of set it up in such a way that it would go off at dawn, so that it would in a sense for the dead, right? You wouldn't expect the dead to actually get up. The spell that revives them triggers at dawn. Put it that way. And they have a particular way of writing these spells, which I'll go into in later kind of in this kind of sequence as we go through this material. As I say, it's quite dense, but I find it very, very interesting. I hope you do too. Or for the living, it could be something that could be triggered in sleep. I've written elsewhere, I think in Isis in Egypt and India, that a version of the mystery cult in which the person virtually wakes and sleeps during the 12 hours of the night, and various things are done to trigger the process of awakening for that person that who wakes at dawn to enter the new life in some way. So briefly then, nearly to finish for this particular section, to bring it back to another text that is very, very rich and popular for our use, the so-called PGM, abbreviated as the PGM, is the collection of magical papyri, the papyri Grecae Magicae, but that name kind of excludes the Egyptian element in a way, when it is mostly Egyptian, which is strange. So Greco-Egyptian might be better, or just Egyptian magical papyri. There are spells and grimoires, many grimoires in that collection that make use of the 7-day week, which comes to us from the Chaldeans, via Egypt. Whether this material really comes from the Chaldeans, well, I don't know. The experts will probably know the answer to that. At the time that these oracles were put together or compiled by the people from the Hermetic traditions of Egypt in Alexandria, the Chaldeans seem to have been an extinct culture, a kind of a culture from the past, and that was always put to good use, to have a culture that was, or famous people who were sort of extinct. You could kind of use them as a kind of psychic thing in a way. So it's a useful extinct culture from which the intellectuals of Alexandria could pin a lot of different concepts. Anyway, the thing of the 7-day week. And so the planetary days, or the planetary hours, are supposedly from this Chaldean system rather than the Greek system, but the idea for it, as we'll find next time, actually is clearer and makes more sense, I would say, but it certainly originates from the Egyptian magical tradition, which we're going to have to go into in a little bit more detail next time. Planetary days, well, that's fairly straightforward to kind of to work out, that there's an association between particular gods and particular days. you know, you can probably work it out from the Anglo-Saxon version of it. Monday is fairly obvious. Tuesday is not so clear. Wednesday, Woden's Day, you know, Thursday, Thursday, Friday, Freya. You have to know that one. If you sort of look them up in French, it's much clearer that they're the sort of Greco-Roman gods. So you've got lundi, mardi, mercredi, jeudi, vendredi. Lundi, the moon, that's fairly straightforward. Mardi, the Mars day, is the Tuesday then. Mercredi, Mercury, is the Wednesday. Jeudi, vendredi, Venus day. Jeudi, Jupiter. Vendredi, Venus, Saturn, and then the Sun. So those are the 7 sacred planets encapsulated still within the days of the week, and you can go and check that out for yourself. So if you've got each 7 days, you can then take that sequence as it repeats. You can repeat that sequence of gods, the moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, the Sun. Keep it in that order, and you could apply that to the hours of the day, right? So you've got 12 hours rather than 7 hours, of course, or 2 lots of 12. And if you kind of add them, so the first hour is Monday of the moon day is the moon. The second hour is Mars, blah, 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 and it repeats. I'll put a table up to illustrate that. It repeats over the course of 24 hours, and by some mathematical miracle, Tuesday will always be the second day. The Tuesday will always be start. The first hour will be Mars. It will keep in order. Now, why that is a mystery of mathematics or whatever, or it's something. Jake said thought it was something to do with the 24-hour cycle, which of course is the invention of the Egyptians. Anyway, we'll go into that a little bit more time. I'll put the table up with the planetary hours, which might seem a bit of a, hard work, but just so you get familiar with it, it's worth thinking about. We'll talk about the significance of that next time, if it's got any significance. And I think what I shall do, I shall tag on to the end of this, the animation of the movements of the stars in the decanal sequence, just a few minutes of it. And I'll repeat this in each of the films, so you get a feeling for this flow of space and time, which is such an important feature of magic. Anyway, that's more than enough for this session of such complicated but fascinating, I hope you'll find, material. I'll see you next time for an even deeper delve into the Egyptian background of all these star maps. So enjoy yourself and remain awake in the grip of the snake, as we're in the month of Renenotet still. And with that, Senebti.